Carey Pallister is the archivist for the Sisters of St. Anne Archives in Victoria, British Columbia. Carey studied art history at the University of Victoria and was previously assistant archivist at the City of Victoria Archives. In 2013, she was guest curator of the exhibition Nurturing the Creative Spirit, the Sisters of St. Anne at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. Welcome, Carey.
Thank you. Yesterday morning, Dr. Susan Close said, "It is a real pleasure to speak about something you are passionate about," and I wholeheartedly agree. It gives me great pleasure to give this paper today. I'm not an academic, I am an archivist, and I'm analyzing from within, using the wealth of archival resources at my disposal. So thank you for inviting me to speak today. Historians and academics have largely overlooked the subject of women religious as female Canadian artists. It is a neglect of a significant cultural and intellectual contribution to Canada's history of art and women. In acknowledging the artistic abilities of women religious, we must also recognize that this is part of a greater and multidimensional conversation of the contextualization of a women's perspective, whether she was consecrated or secular. Artistic women of the 19th and early 20th century society were subject to different rules than men and were professionally disadvantaged. However, in being called to a life of the service of God and empowered and assisted by their communities, some of these consecrated women embarked on artistic careers that would not have been attainable in a secular world. Was the convent a place where female artists were protected, supported, and even applauded? While to modern women, convent life might suggest limitations and restrictions, they were in fact places of emancipation from a secular life where communities of women could dedicate their lives to education, healthcare, social services, and social justice, and often excelled in the arts, music, nursing, and science. Art and the teaching of art was considered by the Sisters of St. Anne, as well as other congregations in Canada, to be an absolutely necessary component of the education of young women, and to this end they encouraged the talents of their sisters. Sister Marie Arsène, Sister Marie-Hélène de la Croix, and Sister Mary Osith were three of the premier artists of the congregation of the Sisters of St. Anne. And it is the latter, and her drawing of the farewell scene that I'm going to talk about today. Sister Marie Osith, born Elizabeth Lavoisier, was 25 when she entered the institution in Lachine, Quebec, and almost immediately was recognized as having a gift for art. Within 3 years of her profession, in 1897, Sister Marie Osith was sent to Victoria to teach art at St. Anne's Academy. Sister had the benefit of maturity and formal art lessons from Sister Marie-Hélène de la Croix, portrait drawing from William Raphael, and landscape and nature drawing from Edmond Dionnet. A truly Renaissance woman, she was a prolific and passionate artist, an art teacher, and excelled at portrait drawing using subjects from her own community and students. She was also an architect and photographer. The Sisters of St. Anne are a congregation of women religious founded in Vaudreuil, Quebec in 1850 by Mary Esther Blondin, now Blessed Anne-Marie Blondin. She founded the community with a vision to educate the children of rural Quebec. This vision grew and developed into missionary work, which brought the Pioneer Sisters to Victoria in 1858. By 1934, the Sisters had established 25 institutions in British Columbia, Alaska, and Yukon, including boarding and day schools, hospitals, and orphanages, and they operated 13 art studios. A search for relevant material and sources outside the confines of the archives for which I work, I lost my place, revealed few resources to draw from. The bulk of the research for this paper is from original sources at the Sisters of St. Anne Archives in Victoria and the Centre Historique des Sœurs de Sainte Anne in Lachine. For most of the documents and images that I will show you today have never been seen before outside the congregation. In this paper, I hope to argue that the work, which is simmering with elegiac emotion and tension and replete with melancholy reflection, is a self-portrait of a religious community, the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Anne. To begin with, and in order to appreciate why I believe that this drawing by Sister Mary Ozith should be considered a self-portrait, we must indeed open our hearts and minds and expand our ideas of self-portraiture. Embodied in this small, beautifully solemn pastel drawing is the intense, raw grief experienced by the sisters at the precise moment illustrated in this drawing, 5:30 p.m. on Saturday, October 6, 1934. On this date, the congregation lived through an event so emotionally turbulent and yet so meaningful and true to their charism that it shook the institution to its very core. 4 sisters left Canada to found a mission school in Japan. In today's world of easy travel and communication, this does not seem to be particularly significant or monumentous, but we must look at it in the context of the time, as well as within the scope of the traditions of religious life. The Sisters of St. Anne had experienced a separation of this enormity once before. 76 years earlier, in 1858, when 4 sisters left their fledgling community in Quebec and embarked on a 2-month journey to found a mission in Victoria, British Columbia, then not yet a province of Canada. This event is analogous to the planned mission to Mars in 2020, a mission of no return. At that moment of departure, in April 1858, the chronicler at the Mother House wrote, "Goodbyes were said, feeling that this was forever, many tears were shed. The community still in her infancy, and already some of her children are leaving." Throughout the years, calls had come from many parts of Canada and the world, including Japan, requesting sisters open schools and hospitals. The sisters had long regretted that they had neither the personnel nor the resources when they had been approached 60 years earlier, and so it was with great eagerness and zeal that the congregation embarked on the preparation to send missionaries 9,600 kilometers across the Pacific Ocean to a foreign land. This event consumed the hearts and minds of the Institute at large, as well as the community in British Columbia. Sister Mary of Bethlehem recalls the day when she was named to the mission in Japan. Mother Mary Dorothy called for me and said quite bluntly, "The congregation has decided to name you to our mission in Japan." She then named my companions. I couldn't talk. I was completely dumbfounded. I went to the chapel and cried and cried. An all-encompassing air of melancholic reflection settled over the entire congregation. On the other side of the country, in Victoria, Sister Mary Theodore, the community historian, wrote, "The realization of it was thrust upon us on the morning of August 14th by the Victoria Daily Colonist, who had learned the names of the sisters who were going to Japan. Consternation spread among us. We shall feel quite orphaned when the Empress of Russia will have sailed away." From July to October, the sisters across Canada could not focus on much else, and when the contingent arrived from the east in early September, farewell tributes in the form of a succession of parties, teas, masses, and dinners were held in every mission from Kamloops to Kuper Island, ensuring that the missionary sisters were thoroughly feted and completely exhausted. Sister Mary Theodore, ever eloquent, wrote, "October 6th. Shall we write this date in letters of gold? No, it is calendared more brilliantly in the symbols of the recording angel." For St. Joseph's Province, this was an epoch-making day, and the day of sailing from our ocean port, the day we feel the pain of leave-taking, the day of tranquil joy that God has accepted our coin of sacrifice. How much each one of us would have liked to have been at the wharf to see the sister travelers off, but such a thing was unheard of, not even thought of, but thoughts do escape, This one did and circulated, so much so that it came to dear Reverend Mother General's own door, and we could hardly believe the concession, "Every sister shall go to the wharf." I think we were a little delirious over it. Friends plied their motors back and forth until some 90 sisters found themselves on the wharf. So this is I like this because this is a type of car that would have taken them back and forth to the wharf. This was significant and so entirely unexpected that it would have not have entered the minds of the sisters as a possibility. Goodbyes had always been said at the convent. The sisters lining the staircase and singing Ave Maria Stella to bid adieu to the departing missionaries. But to ease the grief of the community, Reverend Mother General had responded to the plea to be part of this desperately hard farewell. Indeed, if Mother General had not made this momentous decision, this drawing would not have been painted, and I would not be here today talking about it. Now at the wharf, every detail of the departure was recorded with every available resource: pen, paper, camera, and memory. The 4 missionaries came on deck. With them were 2 grey nuns from Pembroke and 5 Sisters of the Assumption from Nicolette. You can see the different headdresses up on the dock, on the ship there. We could not, nor would not, take our eyes from the group, nor theirs from ours. But skilled nautical hands came and removed the bonds which still connected them to land. The gangway was dragged ashore, the rope loosened from the post, and thus released, the great ship began to move, almost imperceptibly, but as a seemingly motionless bird in the air covers long distances, so then the Empress appeared in midstream soon. Dear sisters who were not there, thank God, and yes, we who were there and felt that awful moment, do thank God that we were there. When the waters began to ripple, that was the moment agreed upon. Our sisters, led by Mr. Frank Sell, began the Ave Maria Stella. In a letter from Sister Mary Joseph, the artist, to Mother Mary Leopoldine, the new superior of the Japan mission, she wrote, "The farewell scene of Saturday, 6 October 1934 remains deeply impressed on our hearts and minds, and ever will. The event is so solemn. The last notes of our prayer, the Ave Maria Stella, die away, and behold a vision of celestial beauty there appear on the western horizon, and forming a background for the ship, the most glorious sunset I have ever seen. It is as if God was lifting the heavenly curtain to permit us to peer beyond this world and give us a token of his approval and promise. Another glance at the beautiful sky all aglow with its brilliant and gorgeous colors, outlining the contrasting shades, the ship and its curling billows of smoke on the calm sea reflecting it all. On returning home, I have an inspiration. That is to make a reproduction in pastel colors of what I have just seen. I begin at once. It is soon finished. Reverend Mother is well pleased, and all the sisters find it true to the scene." This precise moment of departure at 5:30 on that late Saturday afternoon in October was captured by a pastel rendering so true to the original scene that it has been treasured and cherished by the community ever since. Painted exclusively for the Sisters of St. Anne, this drawing has rarely been seen in public. It depicts the departing CPR ship, the Empress of Russia, silhouetted against the sky with a full complement of the radiant colors which make the setting sun so indescribable and captivating. The ship casts a reflection on the calm, cold waters of outer harbor as she moves gracefully stern first before heading for the open ocean. 2 Sisters of St. Anne turn slightly towards each other, stand, head bowed in grief or perhaps prayer at the edge of Riffitt's Wharf, watching, waiting, and yearning as their sisters slowly, deliberately, and yet gently slip away from them. By drawing only 2 of the 90 sisters who came to bid adieu, Sister Mary Joseph is able to expose the sorrow rather than perhaps a more joyful scene of a throng of well-wishers crowded on the wharf. The calmness is deceiving. There is an undercurrent of tension in the stoop of the sisters' shoulders and their proximity to the edge of the wharf. There is an air of somber loneliness. Oscar Wilde said, "Every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not the sitter. The sitter is merely the accident, the occasion. It is not he who is revealed by the painter, it is rather the painter who on canvas reveals himself." To broaden our understanding of what counts as self-representation and specifically self-portraiture, I want to look at the concept of self from various perspectives. Firstly, women religious, who by living in community in some ways lost their individuality and took on a new identity, that of their congregation. Secondly, why a woman living a consecrated life would never have painted a portrait of herself prior to Vatican II. And thirdly, how the sin of pride and the virtue of humility affected them as artists. In all probability, none of us in this room have experienced living this type of intentional vowed community. The concept of fraternal life in common is foreign and unfamiliar to most. Community life is more than living together under one roof. It is about consideration, compassion, acceptance, and respect. It is living a life of service to humanity while spending time together and sharing talents and resources. 80 years ago, sisters' interaction with the secular world was restricted to the contact with those they met through their apostolic work and limited contact or family contact. Other relationships were discouraged, and so, turning inwards to their congregation, they became a tight-knit family. Dressed identically and following strict rules of comportment and decorum, they kept their individuality hidden from the outside world. The concept of self was left behind in a secular world of their former life, and all subsequent accomplishments would be for the good and benefit of the community. Why would a sister have never painted a portrait of herself prior to Vatican II? I posed this question to a sister. Her answer was, why would she want to show herself? Hidden by her costume, hidden from public eye, she was called to bring the message of God to her work, not bring attention to herself. You would have to have an ego to paint a portrait of yourself. This would have fallen into the area of the sin of pride. With that in mind, and not surprisingly, no known self-portrait of a sister has ever been painted in Canada prior to Vatican II. Joining a religious community meant the abdication of self to the service of God, the complete relinquishment of worldly goods and physical contact. Theologically, it was believed that denying oneself brought you closer to God, and humility, modesty, and reverence were virtues. Was there a place for an artistic spirit to flourish and grow in this environment? Only in the context of a benefit to all would an artist in the community have been asked to share her talent in teaching students, creating works of art to adorn convents, chapels, and schools, as well as teaching art to other sisters, and thus the artistic spirit was allowed to thrive and develop. Women religious artists typically worked in obscurity, insofar as the outside world was concerned. While they believed that their talent was a gift from God, they were expected to remain humble, and in this spirit of humility, credit for any work, literary or artistic, was always applied to the community as a whole, rather than an individual sister. Early on, sisters used nom de plume or signed their initials or profession number rather than identify themselves outright. While Sister Marie-Joseph likely never intended this picture to be a self-portrait, she evidently felt the need to express her own emotions as well as those of her community in an artistic way. This paper has tried to argue that by looking at this pastel drawing through a wider frame of experience, the historical context, and by having several first-hand accounts of the event itself, we can, to a certain extent, appreciate that this is not merely a portrait of two sisters on a wharf, but indeed the portrait of an entire community. In viewing all this evidence, it seems, the comparison The compassion and leadership shown by the Superior General in 1934, with her precedent-setting decision, enabled the entire convent to witness an historic departure and also made it possible for Sister Marie-Joseph to draw this scene. The Sisters of St. Anne, along with numerous other congregations, have contributed to art and art history and the teaching of art across Canada. However, this is not widely recognized, studied, or appreciated. While working in obscurity, these consecrated women were encouraged and empowered by the religious communities they served, and many extraordinary works of art depicting both religious and secular subjects